Alberta's Catholic bishops jump into the doctor-assisted suicide debate.
It's a step away from alleviating the suffering to the elimination of the patient. And that's a radically different thing.
Was British Columbia's critique of our province's governments too harsh?
Failed to diversify their economy and lost control of government spending.
Recent attacks on late-night clerks prompt calls for provincial legislation. And do Albertans pay too much to park at Alberta hospitals? And our Primetime This Week panel tonight, Omar Moalem, writer and editor of the Yards magazine, and in Calgary tonight, Darren Krause, managing editor of Metro Calgary, and Joe McFarland, news director at News Talk 770. Welcome back to the program, gentlemen. Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you kindly.
Let's get started. Alberta's Catholic bishops are demanding that health centres in the province prohibit doctor-assisted suicides, a practice the Catholic bishops consider morally wrong, as per a statement they issued this week to the media. But others say the bishop's statements are out of touch with the sentiment of Canadians.
85% of Canadians are in support of what the Supreme Court has said. So what the statement today by the Church does is really highlights how out of touch they are with the general opinion of Canadians today.
And of course, that's Bradley Peter with Dying with Dignity Canada, who released the Ipsos poll this week. Omar, you would actually rather only hear from those with medical professions, not those in the Church.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dismiss the importance of the Catholic Church to Albertans and Canadians, and historically they've been an important voice when it comes to ethical issues. But when it comes to this, I really don't care what anyone has to say except for the doctors, nurses, and the patients. And I think that I'm like a lot of people when I think that maybe they're just out of touch when it comes to this cause. As you saw from that survey, most Canadians would agree that we have this right. And I don't understand why a bishop should have more say over dying than the dying person themselves. That I do not understand.
Well, Joe, this is such an uncomfortable discussion for so many people.
And imagine for the doctors in particular, because here you are having to make that choice between helping the patient that you're tasked with helping and going against your own personal beliefs, for example. I do believe at the end of the day that a compromise is going to have to be reached a lot along the lines of abortion, for example. So what's going to end up happening is each individual situation is just so much different. I don't think it's safe to just broad brush it and say, you know, if what's good for one is good for all. You have to really take it individual, case by case. And I think once everyone kind of takes a quick step back and a quick breath and realize that that is the case, then, you know, say for example in this case is going to be, you know, a doctor says, you know what, I'm not comfortable doing this, but I have a doctor friend who can help, then that'll maybe ease that strain just a little bit more. And I can't imagine being the interesting thing will be a Catholic going to a Catholic doctor to say I need help. What are the rules around that? So there's some interesting dynamics here, but I'm with Omar on this one. I think you have to hear from just the primary sources here, the doctor and the patient.
Well, Darren, why do you think there's a pattern emerging here?
Well, there is a pattern emerging here with the Catholic leadership. You take a look at the way they've responded on social issues like the LGBT situation, and then you kind of go with what's happening here on doctor-assisted suicide. They're appearing to be a little bit tone deaf in the whole situation. Now, there's probably a middle ground, as Joe had suggested, but I think before that all happens, somebody needs to remind the Catholic Church that we're in the 21st century now.
All right, next up, we continually hear from the Premier's office about their role as a current government, including picking up the pieces from the Tory regime. But British Columbia's government throne speech this week said Alberta is a prime example of how not to run a province, no matter who's in power. Alberta was mentioned several times in the BC speech as a province that has lost its focus.
Failed to diversify their economy and lost control of government spending.
My impression is that these are comments that are directed at the former PC government. I mean, they failed to diversify the economy. That is a fact.
Of course, that is what we've often heard from our current government time and time again. Joe, is BC right in their assessment?
You know what? I think that the message is right. It's just the tact was a little off in that regard. It really, man, oh man, as far as everybody wants to talk about economic diversification. I feel like we talk about this every single week. No one knows how to do it. I mean, it's not as easy as turning off the tap and expecting the dollars to keep rolling in. What is most frustrating out of all of this is the fact that it feels as though all these provinces and cities are all piling on at the end of the day, and no one's standing up for Alberta in a sense. And here we have the Alberta government now continually blaming the PC regime, when at some point we got to pull our boots up and say, okay, yeah, we're on board, but this is a national issue at the end of the day. And I'm circling March 3rd on my calendar in terms of that's the first ministers meeting between the PM and the premiers. That's going to be really setting the tone in terms of a national message when it comes to energy in particular, I believe.
Omar, you actually laughed at the story.
Oh, yes, I laughed very much. I mean, it really did feel like the BC Lieutenant Governor was throwing shade at Alberta. And, I do feel like they somewhat have a point. Alberta does have a reputation for spending a lot in good times and then biting the pavement in bad times. But I mean, I didn't take it too seriously. I would love to see this become a tradition. I mean, maybe, Notley can fire shots at BC for Vancouver's exorbitant housing price, and Brad Wall can fire shots at Manitoba for, I don't know, it's wild hog infestation. I don't know what the problem is there.
Darren, you say those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, is how you put it.
Well, that's the thing. I had to laugh when I heard this. First of all, as Joe mentioned, I mean, the throne speech is neither the time nor the place to start throwing stones at other provinces, especially because BC knows all too well what it's like to be in a debt-ridden situation. Only recently have they been able to project surpluses, but for the Premier to do it in that situation, and then on top of it to pour salt in the wound by then spewing the economic diversification message of Alberta's NDP, it was just a little bit too much.
Well, for Christy Clark in particular, this isn't the first time she's thrown Alberta under the bus. Look at her meeting with Alison Redford a few years back. I mean, this is nothing new, and it's at some point, I'd imagine and I hope that Alberta's leadership finally steps up and say, hold on a second here.
I think more than anything, it was a message to the old PC government, not to Albertans themselves. But I can see how people would interpret it that way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, protecting late-night workers. And do we Albertans pay too much to park at hospitals? Stay with us.